Great. Thank you for joining us today. This is a seminar by the RCE of Greater Atlanta, which is a regional center of expertise on education for sustainable development, acknowledged by the United Nations University. It's a regional sustainability network that supports the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals at the local level through education and training. The network brings together universities and colleges with nonprofit, community, government, and business partners. An action group within that, the higher education learning community, aims to facilitate faculty and research active student engagement with the SDGs in a collective learning environment. Participants include faculty and research active students from Emory University, Georgia State University, Georgia Tech, Kennesaw State University, Morehouse College, Spelman College, and the University of Georgia, creating a dynamic network of research and teaching faculty, practitioners, youth, and community partners in Greater Atlanta who work together to offer research seminars like this one, symposia, curricular resources, teaching workshops, and a variety of publications to advance the SDGs. I'm Michael Black from Georgia State University. I'm the co-director of the higher education learning community. Today, we are proud to have Dr. Volker Franke, I did already, Volker Franke, who is a professor of conflict management in the Department of Political Science and International Affairs at Kennesaw State University. He's also the founder and chairman of Trends Global, an Atlanta-based nonprofit organization empowering disadvantaged and underserved populations through research and engagement locally, nationally, and globally. Dr. Franke is a professor of conflict management at Kennesaw State University and founding director of the PhD program in international conflict management here at KSU. Before coming here, he served as director of research at the Bonn International Center for Conversion, one of Germany's premier peace and conflict research and capacity building institutes. Prior to that, he was director and managing editor of the National Security Studies Case Studies program at Syracuse University, where he holds a PhD in political science from the Maxwell School. He's the author of Preparing for Peace, Military Identity, Value Orientations, and Professional Military Education, and more than 40 journal articles, book chapters, case studies, and research reports on issues related to peace and security studies. The title of his talk is Sustaining Hope, Building Collaborative Resilience in Post-Conflict Societies. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Mike, for that kind introduction. We have a good number of people here, probably about, for those of you who can't see, probably, I would say 30 people at least here in the room. And then we have plenty of people online, so this is terrific. If you have comments, questions, put them in, if they're online, folks, put them in the chat. Kaylee will monitor the chat and let me know when there's a question or a comment. If you have questions or comments here, you can raise your hand. Okay? This is a research seminar, Mike. I'm assuming we're not doing a lecture. I'm talking as much as I will be talking, and whenever you have a comment or a question, stop me. Let's do this as a seminar informally, please. All right, so this is about the idea was when Stuart, who was online, asked me if I wanted to talk. They said we're doing something on sustainability and development, and would you like to talk about and the SDGs? Would you like to talk about your project? And that fits right in. Yes, happy to do that. So works here. There. All right, so I had this video playing while you came in. It was about 5 minutes. I wanted to just play it and give you a sense, a feel for what the context is like. I think that's more telling than if I tell you about this. This is probably a little bit easier. Let's see if we can get this. that was meant to give you a little bit of an impression of what's going on. So let's talk a little bit more, tell you a little bit more about what the project is. It's working. So you saw the video. We'll talk a little bit, and this ties into the research seminar about sustainable development and SDGs, that connection. Then I want to talk a little bit about what we have experienced for the last 80 years as challenges in international development, and we have not really fixed them. This program is intended to fix some of them, or at least do it differently. So then we're going to talk about how we address these challenges, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the details of what we're doing in the program. That's the idea. As I said, at any point, stop me and with comments and questions. All right, hope. This project is about hope. We called it hope, and when we called it hope, when we submitted our proposal, we had no idea how fitting that title was. When you think about this, right? Who in here has dreams? Show of hands. Who in here has dreams? Hey, even if you don't have any, you know what it is to have a dream, right? That is different. We learned early on, very difficult for people in this context in Liberia to actually dream and have dreams. And so we changed everything, not everything, but we changed how we approached the project immediately, because we realized before we can talk about hope, before we can talk about psychosocial skills, before we can talk about addressing prolonged social trauma, people need to dream. They need to have ideas. They need to have something that lets them think about creating a better future. That is different in our program. So here are the Sustainable Development Goals that all of you know, and that's the basis for the research seminar. 17 different goals. Our program addresses all of these either directly or indirectly. And that is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 out of 17 goals we're tackling with this program. Talk a little bit about this. After the end of the Cold War, the United Nations Development Program came up with every year they're coming up with the Human Development Report, but the one in 1994 was focused specifically on the issue of human security. We learned that what is important in international relations is not only states anymore, or large companies, or terrorist organizations, or non-state actors. What's important is every single individual. We learned this from the genocides in the former Yugoslavia and in Rwanda, in Sudan, and we're still learning. There is, we knew after the end of the Cold War, a clear connection between security and development. You can't have one without the other. That's where human security comes in. That's where the Sustainable Development Goals, they overlay that and add to it. Huh? So these questions that you have on the slide, these questions come straight from that report, 1994. 30 years later, we're still looking at it. Let's see where we are. Okay. In 2022, UNDP came up with this report, New Threats to Human Security. And because those are threats to human security, they're also threats to development. Climate change, downsides of digital technology, violent conflict, healthcare, migration, we could add to that, or refugees. We look at this, none of these problems or threats can be tackled by an individual actor. Right? It requires collaboration, coordination, and bringing people together. Most people, the Sustainable Development Goals report, the last one says, in the world feel insecure. Okay? Fewer than 1 in 7 feel secure or relatively secure. 1 in 7. More than half of the global population feels affected by high human insecurity. Okay? That's where we are. Is human security and achieving human security just a dream? This is what the human security conceptualization looks like. Okay? We're looking at values and beliefs. It's more than just physical violence, it's also structural violence. It is about not just about human security, but it's oftentimes also about human dignity. Human insecurity comes from fear. It comes from want. If we were to look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we would see a lot of countries in the world are still struggling at the very basic first and second level needs provision. This leads to fear, anger, and safety. Yet, we're all in the same boat. Solidarity. The idea for human security is that we bring everybody together around this narrative of how conflict is affecting us all, or how underdevelopment is affecting us all, or how climate change, natural catastrophes, all of this is affecting us all. This should give us some sort of solidarity to then tackle those problems together. So, development for the last 70 years looked exactly like that. Right? So we had fear, anger, and safety. And because that's a fact, we now come up with policies to address problems and conflicts. Okay? I want you to keep that in mind. We are here, our job here that we have learned, that we teach our graduate students, is we need to tackle problems. We need to address problems, we need to solve problems. Guess what? That's what we've been doing for 80 years, and it is not working. Okay? That's not working. What are we doing instead? The whole project focuses, instead of on problems and conflicts, it focuses on those too. But the narrative has changed. We're changing the direction. We look at, instead of looking at problems, you have a problem and we need to solve it. What are your possibilities? What are your dreams? Where do you want to take this? You, not us. First thing that we do is we listen before we do anything. The first thing that most development actors do is they do something before they listen. That's a big problem. Huh? So we're focusing on hopes, dreams, purpose, and empathy. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to change the narrative from something negative, something that to be resolved, to something positive. Right? We're not going in and saying, oh, here's your problem, and by the way, here's your fix. What are your, we ask, what are your gifts? What are your talents? What are your dreams? What is it that you want to do? This research seminar and every single development project is ultimately about sustainability. Right? If we're, as long as we in the West, the developed countries, as long as we say what needs to happen and we put the money toward what needs to happen, everybody's happy to take the money, but nothing is happening, or not much. Because the incentives are wrong. The incentives are, we need money. That's not the incentive. The incentive should be, we have a dream. How can we implement that dream? You see, we're changing the narrative. We're trying to change the narrative. People are looking differently at their own opportunities and not at the problems they have to solve. Of course, when we then say, well, what stands in the way of you fulfilling your possibilities, oftentimes that will be conflict, problems, structures, whatever that might be. Now we can address it, but we're addressing it with a positive outlook, right? The outlook is we want to create possibilities first. And if it requires solving problems to create possibilities, so be it. Most of the time that will be the case. But you see, the starting point is different, very different. And if we can get that accomplished, we can get buy-in. We need to vest those who we're working with in what they are working on. We can't tell them do this X, Y, Z, and here's that much money to do this. No, this doesn't work. Okay, we know that. So let's take a look at international development. International development has failed in many ways. Among them, these 5 reasons that are listed here. International development increases dependency because we're relying on external funds. Okay, we see this in our program right now. Oftentimes, when we ask people, even our own staff, well, here's something else we need to do. Oftentimes, the question is, am I paid for that? This is an attitude that we have created over the last 500-600 years. Okay? People simply hold their hand out and we give. We're turning this around. We want them to put their hand in their pocket and think, what is it that you actually do? And how can we help do this? Okay? Increased dependency. Sustainability cannot be achieved with dependency on foreign aid and continued dependency on foreign aid. That's not sustainable for anybody. Risk of corruption, I don't think I need to go into much detail about these challenges, right? We all know them. Economic and political pressures. Donors may place economic or political pressure on the receiving country or on those who implement the project. We ran a project a couple of years ago in Afghanistan through the US Institute of Peace. And every single time we send a report, they would come back and say, where are the women? We need more women participation. Okay? No, we don't. Because depending on where you are, it is dangerous for women to participate. Okay? You can't just come in and say we don't have enough women. We need to figure out a different way to include the women, but we can't come in top down and say we need more women. That's not working because women only show, people only show up to any event if they're safe. Not just in the event, but also going to and from the event. Okay? So oftentimes we're taking the Western lens and we're looking at, well, what happens here? Obviously, we're all better off with quota systems, right? In Germany, we have quota systems at the local level, 30% need to be women in local government. That is not working in societies where the role of women is different. Okay? We can't simply come in and say, this is what you need and this is what we give you money for. Yes, of course, they take the money because they need the money, but we're not getting the effects that we're looking. So similarly, I mean, this is the donors, but then there's also pressure on the receiving countries. You may remember President Bush had a policy that if there are any developing countries that have reproductive health programs, particularly birth control type programs, the United States will not fund those countries. That is direct pressure. Okay? Local needs. Foreign aid primarily benefits external actors. One of the reasons we learned, perhaps the key reason that we were awarded this project and not someone else, was that about 2/3 of the money that's awarded by the US government actually goes to that. Most international development projects are reverse. It's not uncommon that you have 2/3 to 80% of the money going to the INGOs, and then a little bit is left for actually implementation. INGOs create a problem in country. INGOs don't pay local salaries. INGOs pay whatever they're paid, which is more than local salaries. What does that mean? You're creating a two-tiered economy in many developing countries, where you have people who live and work and earn money locally. So I'll give you an example. Our trainers in Liberia are paid $400 a month. Okay? If they work for an INGO, they'd be paid triple. Okay? That's a problem, because people who live there, either you get an INGO job, and then you think, what does that do for the entire economy? Now restaurants raise their prices. People who rent out apartments or buildings raise their prices because there's a different actor now who can pay more. And we all know what that does to the local economy, right? So all of this, I would say, are really severe international development challenges. Now, what do we do about that? Localization. Our program is funded by USAID and by their locally led development initiative. They're funding a total of 6 programs. We're one of them. We happen to work in West Africa. But what do we do differently? I talked about we want to focus on possibilities first. Imagine a better future, right? Dream. Imagine a better future. Share that. Build trust. The problem you have in societies, post-war societies, where you have prolonged social trauma. Prolonged social trauma is trauma that has existed for at least a generation and has affected all of society. There's no one in Liberia who hasn't been affected by it simply. But not a lot is done. So what you have as a fact is people can't trust one another. If you walk around the street and you don't know if the person coming towards you is someone you can trust, you can feel safe, or you have to be afraid, that's your daily life. How in that situation are you going to now think about, a better future and how your life could be better? We first need to start right there with that feeling of safety. That's where we are. Building trust among people. That's very important. Right? So you don't trust just your ethnic group. You trust in general. Creating shared visions. In all our exercises and all our activities, that's what we do. We start with our participants and we try to create a vision where have them think about how they envision their community, their town to be better and look better in 10 years. Find local solution to local problems. Yes, education is a problem in most developing countries. Build us a school is not something that we want. Okay? Education is a problem. What can you do to improve the skills of people in your community? Not what do you need from us that we can pay for. That's the wrong approach. Then you invest with local partners. In every town that we're in, or in every county, we're looking for local partners, either organizations or individuals who are interested in helping. And we try to recruit our trainers and our staff from those local organizations. We want the local organizations to be vested in this because when we're no longer there, they can take over. That's sustainability. Transfer responsibility and ownership to local actors expeditiously as quickly as we can. That's important. For as long as developing countries ask developed countries for money, that is not happening. Then we're not transferring responsibility. Now, asking for money is not the problem, but asking to pay for what? Okay? If the money is there to help these locally led and engaged activities and ideas, that's one thing. Right? If it is, however, to look at how can, you know, for us to control what's happening there by saying we pay for X, Y, Z, that's not helping individuals figure out and groups and communities figure out what they actually need. Okay? Development is oftentimes done on a national level. Development needs to happen on a local level. We learned in Afghanistan, you know, the war, the American occupation, all of that, important, but not really important for people who live there. It's much more important that they have food on the table, right? And that they have a pasture to actually rear cattle or whatever they're doing. That's important to them. That locally, that's what development oftentimes misses because it's supposed to be, you know, a big blueprint approach that works for everything and everybody. Let's talk a little bit about this. Let me tell you a little bit more about our program. Any questions so far before I go into that detail? Good. Katie, anything in the chat? No? Good. All right. So this is a 5-year USAID funded community peacebuilding program. It runs in 3 counties. You see it on the map here. Nimba, we have started in Nimba. Grand Gide will start in January or February of early next year to roll it out, and then Maryland, the one in the south, we're going to start rolling out activities in 2025. What are the goals? Well, we talked about already building hope and creating possibilities. Okay? We talked about safety after prolonged social trauma. Psychosocial skills building. So let me give you an example. We're running a number of exercises that are mindfulness exercises. We're starting out by people noticing bodily responses. So think about this. You get angry. You feel something, right? Before you start yelling at people, you already feel the anger building up, right? That is where we start. If we try to give tools and ideas for how people can calm themselves down, one of the measures that we have for our participants, there were 2. One is on empathy, the other one is impulse control. How well are they able to control impulses? That basic, if you think about it, that basic. Because that's the basis. If people don't trust one another, they cannot together develop anything. Right? So that's where we're starting, with some psychosocial skills that can help build empathy and trust. Okay? Conflict resolution, capacity strengthening, right? That's there for USAID because that sounds good. But that's what we're doing, right? People need to resolve their conflicts themselves, so they need some skills to do so. Individual and collaborative resilience building. I mean, there's a lot on resilience that comes from the natural disaster literature and field. We can apply that to, if you will, social disasters and some of that. So it's individual resilience that comes with the mindfulness and the psychosocial skills. And then it's collaborative resilience because people work together to come up with ideas that help them, but also better their communities. Okay? And then importantly, as I said, learning to dream, imagine, and create a better future. That's really important. The creating is very important. It's active. It's not passive. It's not, we're coming in and we give you a better future. No. It's them learning how to think through things and reflect and build their own better future. That's the plan. So we have 5 different interventions, if you will. We start with the community, and this is very new. This is not, I have not seen this anywhere in my 30 years and looking at development projects in this way. We have 9 different communities, 9 different towns that we're in, and then several communities within each town. Each town, we start with a community baseline assessment. For about 2 weeks, we have colleagues from the Kofi Annan Institute for Conflict Transformation at the University of Liberia go to these towns, go door to door, and do a really more or less representative sample. That doesn't exist. I have not seen that in the development context. What does that mean? First of all, our colleagues map out, they talk to locals, they map out the town. And it's a huge map, you go to Google Maps and they print out the map and then they take sticky notes and they try to figure out where the different communities are. Then they go into these communities and they do a survey. So we have 3 communities so far that we're working in Nimba County. And we have between 400 and 600 plus surveys for each town. We're analyzing that. Then we're also, the other 4 interventions are always with participants. Okay? So participants come in, the safe spaces is the psychosocial skills, mindfulness training. They come in and we do a pre-post test. We measure the attitudes before and we measure the attitudes after, so we can actually see if any of the changes are significant, and if something happens there. The community baseline assessment is used for us to look at the pre-test values, and then we compare that to the community values, and we can see, do we have a representative sample, or do we have outliers in this group, right? So what we want to do is we want to say, in a few years we can say, here are the effects of the interventions on our participants, and because our participants are representative of the larger community, we could now extrapolate that we will probably see similar impact if everybody participates. That's the idea here. Youth dialogues, this is something that Timur and I are looking at right now and developing. I mean, when we talk about youth in the development context in Africa, the United Nations considers youth to be people between 18 and 35. So that's much, much longer than what we consider youth in the United States or in the West. So in these youth dialogues, we want to bring youth together in larger groups, then to form subgroups where they tackle so-called dream projects. They figure out what could we do to help ourselves and to help our community or our town. Anything anything goes there. Then we haven't started this. We're looking at tents as a self-guided way, also with mindfulness skills, to make this more accessible to a larger audience than just those who participate. The Safe Spaces training is 6 weeks every day, 2 hours. Okay? So the tents does some of that, but it puts psychosocial development and attitudes and perceptions of the past together. Important here is not just that there was a civil war. What's important is how that civil war is perceived differently by different groups. And different people, we've done that before, and we find that different people, you all know this, if we have conflict, right? Oftentimes we have conflict because your understanding of what happened is different from my understanding, but we don't talk about that. So part of what we're doing in this intervention is we're bringing people together to talk about, what was it like 30 years ago? What was it like 100 years ago? Write down, tell us what you think, so we can get a sense of how they're constructing their reality. And if you can somehow link the different realities, you now can build collaborative resilience. And then the last solution accelerator intervention, that's a systemic level intervention. In this intervention, we bring together what we call prime actors or key stakeholders in each town, well, actually in each county. We have iterative dialogue sessions with them. We start with a smaller group, and with every dialogue session, we expand. We bring in more participants. This is the systems level. These may be big business owners, traditional leaders, government officials, influential people, women who have a lot of following. It doesn't really matter. We're asking, this is also new, we're asking our prime actors every time at the end of every single round of dialogue, who are other influential actors that we should include. Then we look at this, and the ones that come up, often we'll include them in the next round. And so the hope is that at some point, we're going to have a fairly inclusive set of crime actors at the systems level engaged with us. Okay? This has two advantages. One, youth or participants develop ideas of things they want to do, but they do need the environment that enables them to actually do that. The environment is created by these prime actors. Okay? So if they're on board and they can support this, we now have a sustainable systemic structure. Okay? That's the one advantage. The second advantage is, and if you read, this was a really big thing maybe 20 years ago, spoilers in peace operations or spoilers in peace building. Okay? This might be a way to bring spoilers together. So we have a way to measure type of prime actor, if you will. So we have prime actors who are pro-social actors. So whatever they're doing for the good of the community. Okay? We have pro-self actors. Those are actors, whatever they're doing, they do for themselves, but it benefits the community. So if I open a restaurant or a business, right, I do that for my own income, but the community benefits. Okay? And then we have anti-social actors. Those are oftentimes in the peace building literature called spoilers. Those who are against. Okay? And there's a large literature discussing how we can bring in spoilers. This might be a way to bring in spoilers, because if you start with pro-social actors, you expand to pro-self actors, you bring in a few anti-social actors, and people will start thinking, what's going on? I'm against anything new, but everybody seems to be involved here. Maybe I'll take a look. Right? Again, you see, it's not that we're going in and saying you must participate. No, we're hoping that this organically will happen. Okay? So, but the idea here is that our program is set up to where we have micro-level interventions with individual participants, but we also have systems levels interventions, because both of those need to come together for a successful program. So here are our 5 interventions. They're all improving resilience at the systems, at the group, and at the individual level. And that's important, because that is the basis for sustainability. Local development is international development. Okay? If you think about this, we're working with our interventions at the community development level, but it has implications, right? We're going to the county with our solution accelerators, but you can do something similar. The ECOWAS, the West African economic region, could use something like that as well, right? So it's like, I like to think of this as an accordion, right? You can play it very narrow, or you can expand it, and it works. So the point here is that we're not really selling, bringing, creating content as much as we are interested in process. Okay? Because if we can develop process, and we can hone process, and we can improve process, then we can take that elsewhere, and this works. This should work. Okay, this is not a Liberia specific approach. It happens to be we're testing it out and we're developing it in Liberia, but it should work in other contexts as well.
Dr. Franke, when you scale the process, are there changes, or does the process stay the same?
Scale to somewhere else?
You're saying the accordion concept, so essentially you're saying it's a scalable project.
Well, that depends then on the context and the specifics in the context. So if we have our youth dialogue training, when we have it done, is we have maybe 30 people or so in a cohort. They meet, they develop a vision for their town, and then at some point we split them into subgroups that we call dream teams, to actually think about what would they want to do, what possibilities would they like to create as a team. That is scalable, right? That we can take anywhere. What comes out of it and what specific projects they're then undertake, that's different. That's totally different. But we want to make sure we create a process that can be adapted. Yeah? So yeah, in vastly different contexts and environments. Yeah.
Okay, so you spoke about spoilers, and there's already a program running in Liberia. Have you encountered that with the spoilers, and stakeholders who are spoilers in this?
No,
Not yet.
no, not yet, because we're not at that point, right? At this point, we have to say, we did the community baseline assessment in inbound in 3 towns. We've done safe spaces training that's running, so the psychosocial skills training. We're starting youth dialogue training next year. What we're beginning in this fall, early next year also is part of the solution accelerator part is in what we call informational network gathering. We want to bring some prime actors together there ready to talk. We want to also bring in some participants to tell what they have been doing, right? Because we think if we bring all of them together, and then the participants can talk about what they're doing, and the systems level prime actors can see what's being done, maybe we can create some synergies, right? When we get to that point, then it makes sense to look at that, right? To see who do we bring in. We have done in our community baseline assessment, we had 2 questions, open-ended questions that we're starting to code now. One was, who are the most influential actors in your town? And the second one was, why are they the most influential? Like, we need to code that, we need to see what comes of that. So that's in process. This is something, talk to me in a year. And then we're further along, and then we look. And yes, at that point, we should actually figure out who spoilers are and bring them in.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I was because it sounds similarly positive so far. And in an African context, I expected that there would be some blockades at some point. Even if you're using most of the local voices to push this forward, I expected that there would be some. You mentioned some of the instances of corruption, but that was on a broader scale. I was wondering if there was something more local that's happened so far.
No, that's what we're getting to. That's important. Are you will?
Yeah, so you may recall that my interest is amnesty as a framework for peacemaking. You mentioned because of the situation in Liberia, the war and all of that, people walking into each other and into each other, and the issue of trust. Now, what role did you see, or what is friends doing about the issue of forgiveness, and how do you build that trust? And the idea of the youth dialogue also resonates with something that I've been considering, which is like our Hausa word for sulhu, which is dialogue. So I'm considering the Muslim-Christian dialogue in the process, because the group that I want to work with are the youths who have been in the Boko Haram conflict and who have accepted amnesty and all that. So I wanted to know how you see
What we're doing about forgiveness.
forgiveness in that area.
Nothing. Or maybe a lot. Okay, so your question, Ayuba, already reflects what I said is the entirely wrong approach. Huh? You said, what are you doing about this? And if I told you now what we're doing about this, we wouldn't be doing what I told you for the last 30 minutes we are doing. Okay, so now What that means is if we have people talking with one another, they're discussing what to do and how to dream and what stands in the way of the dream, or what or who stands in the way of the dream. If at that point it becomes important to the participants that forgiveness needs to happen, right? If we get to where they're discussing, how do we understand this conflict? Everybody who's sitting there, do we understand the conflict the same way or differently? How do we understand this conflict? At that point, it may emerge, right, that forgiveness is important. Great. Then they will figure out how to do this. It's not a truth and reconciliation or a restorative justice project. Now, we can use this process, that would be the next thing, apply for funding to try the processes. That's why it's important to focus on process and not content, to try these processes in a restorative justice setting, right? But the focus is then slightly different. And the framing is slightly different. The framing would not be what dreams do you have and how do you want to create a better future. The framing might be, how can you live with others who have wronged you or that it's a different focus, but the same process could be applicable. We can talk about that, Ayuba. Okay, we can adapt it for Nigeria if you want to. Okay. So I have a couple more slides. Maybe I wanted to show you very, very, very preliminary findings. Okay. So these findings come from the first year in Nimba County, but what you see, and this is actually not that different from what we found when we used the same approach in Afghanistan. When we look at the left top table, key hopes, key fears, key problems, development, and you see that we have half the people almost say development. They have hope for better development. They fear because development is not there. The key problems are missing development, whatever that means. Peace, social relations, and health. Infrastructure, if you think about this, infrastructure can mean a lot of things. Infrastructure can mean building roads. Infrastructure in Liberia means in part also building water wells, right? Access to water. Access to water, our people said, is a problem because one, there is none. So many times they have to walk too far to get water. And secondly, the water that they have access to is not sanitary. So it's not just an infrastructure problem, it's also a health problem. When we look at, we asked participants, what are your best hopes for your personal future? What are your worst fears about your personal future? And then we gave them a ladder. I should put that on that slide. We gave them a ladder. On this ladder, imagine a ladder with 10 rungs. You look at where you are today. Where on that ladder would you sit yourself today in terms of your hopes and fears? Where were you 5 years ago? Where do you think you will be in 10 years? So this tells us a lot. It's a beautiful scale. This tells us a lot. It tells us what you see here in most of this in the lower table, past, present, and future. What we want to see is we want to see high future scores. That indicates optimism, right? We've done this hopes and fears question in Lebanon. Isaac, most of you know him, does the dissertation in Lebanon. Lebanon is different. Okay, what you see here, Liberians have around a 9 out of 10 for their future. In Lebanon, the future is somewhere in 4 and 5. The present in Lebanon, and this was before Israel invaded Gaza. Okay? The present was around 2. The past was maybe also around 4 or 5. Okay, and when you look at that comparison, Liberians are actually fairly optimistic. This is good, right? If they find their dreams and they're optimistic, we can work with that. Okay? Then what you see on the right, the top right, is our participants, and we have So far, we data only from 140, which is not that many, so this is very, very preliminary. But look at what we're looking at here. These are all scale results. So we're looking at, you see, I've talked about impulse control. There's a 5-point scale every time. Talked about impulse control is going up, so we're improving that. Talk about collaborative reasoning going up. That's what we want, right? Because we want them to work together. Their moral reasoning ability is going up. And social dominance orientation, that they think their group is better than any other group, is going down. This is all what we would want to see. Now, somebody should now ask me, why is safety going down, right? Because that seems very surprising. And why would I put it on here? Excellent question I had there. Why is this important? Part of this is a scale of 5 or 6 questions. One of the questions is, I feel safe in my neighborhood. That went down significantly. Now, are we making people feel less safe? No. There are several reasons why this might happen. And one, on Tuesday, Liberia had its election. It has been fairly peaceful, but the results are not in yet, and we don't know what's going to happen once the results are in. Okay, so before you have an election with high tensions, that might make people feel less safe. So this is the time effect for those of you who take the research methods class. The other reason is we're talking about it. See, people are walking around, they don't know that a lot of the issues is that they don't feel safe. They just don't know because they haven't had the tools to reflect on it. Okay? So if now we talk about safety, we make it prevalent, it's not surprising that they're going on and they're looking for these things everywhere. Am I safe or am I not safe? So this is actually, I think a really positive that it's going on because they're thinking about this. We have no effect on that, obviously, and there are alternative factors that might have affected this. But the idea is, yes, first we need to raise awareness. So that's not a bad thing. So I'll leave that up. That's the last slide. You can see what they're saying, what our participants and trainers are saying. Question.
Yes. So you mentioned optimism in Liberia, that it's pretty high and you compared it to Lebanon. So I believe it's actually a very important trait for the Hope for the Future project. So I'm just asking this, that what if this is a preliminary measurement? What if in the course of the project, optimism drops? What else are we going to bank on for the Hope for the Future project?
If optimism drops?
Yeah.
It won't drop. No, it will drop if something major happens. So if there's post-election violence, all of that, that's not anything we can affect. Okay? But it makes it so optimism is really important. And now these are basically what you have here. We don't need. It's not important that this is a 9. Okay? This is all inflated. Everybody wants to feel better in the future. What is important is that the trajectory that is it steady? Were you better off in the past as you are in the present, and where do you see this going? Right? It gives you sort of how do people feel about where they are at this particular moment, how they got there compared to what it was like. So it does the 9. You know, if this was a 2, 4, and 6, I would be just as happy. Right? The 9 doesn't make it. It's subjective. You can't do anything with that. But what is important is the tendency that you see between past, present, and future. Right.
Yeah, Prof. So who defined the development for them? Did you define it or they define it?
What do you mean with development?
Please go to the previous slide.
Previous slide?
Yeah, so those indicators.
Yeah. Yeah.
Development,
Yeah.
education, peace,
Yeah.
social relations?
Yeah.
Like those parameters, like those blocks, who define them?
We did. However, this is, you're in the class right now, right? This is qualitative, okay? So you have, they fill it out, okay? What do you think your worst, this is about the community, for the community baseline assessment, we're asking about their personal futures or hopes and fears, but we ask, what are your best hopes and wishes for your community or for your town? What are your worst fears? So now they will write down something: lack of education, lack of jobs, and all of this, what they write. Out of that, we develop a code book, okay? And then we take that code book, and now I can manipulate, or can statistically manipulate this. So what I did here is I gathered what they did. We coded this with two coders, with agreement and so on. So we have a high intercoder reliability. We coded this, and everything that was mentioned under development, I put together for a summary slide. So we determined that if somebody says, well, we don't have enough jobs, that is a development code. Okay? But we didn't say you have a development problem. We looked at what are they saying, how are they responding to the survey, and then we code this. And then that's the statistical analysis. 55.3 had some sort of development hope. 15% of those said something about education. Okay? And it's just interesting at a broad level to compare. Does that make sense, Brian?
Yeah, so it makes sense.
Yeah, so Kristen, Kaylee, they've done the coding. Timo, talk to them if you want real coding examples. They're tired of coding. Yeah.
So, and back to your optimism question, when you're measuring or asking about optimism, is it like at this broad amorphous level, I feel optimistic, or is it, I now feel more optimistic about my local level, I now trust my local. Is that distinguished?
No, it's just how do you feel today? How do you think you feel in 5 years? How did you feel 5 years ago? This would be way too detailed. I just want to get a sense. And this is really something that I call optimism. You know, if your outlook for the future is better than your outlook for the present, that to me is optimism. That was the main reason. Okay, let's go back to this. This is what some of our trainers and participants are saying about what we're doing. It's really interesting. We were collecting, our trainers are collecting sort of anecdotal evidence. People come back and they say, what did you do? And a lot of people, this mindfulness exercise, a lot of the participants go home and they try it with their family or with friends. And then they come back and they report on it. And what you can see is that they're getting already, after a few weeks, they receive feedback where you're different. Instead of exploding easily, they're more calm. So we see, this is very anecdotal. Hopefully in a couple of years, we really have large scale data to show this. But at this point, all I can say is it's very encouraging. Some of the things we're doing are working, other things are not. So we need to find and replace some of the scales that aren't measuring well. That's to be expected. Yes.
Yeah, one question about ways in which these new approaches, whether these new approaches on process and intervention and engagement, whether these methods are also changing the ways in which you deploy perhaps data. How does the, do you think that considering the previous 80 years of use of data in international development, are these data uses changing because of these approaches, or how would you see these?
I would say it's different data. Okay. most of the data that we're using when we're talking about development is secondary data that you pull on from the World Bank or the United Nations, right? And so all of that data is collected at an aggregate national level. That is a problem. We all know that countries are different. So we have, for instance, I'll give you a very concrete example. Some of our PhD students are struggling with permission by the university to travel to countries because they're listed on the State Department, you know, threat level, risk level. If it's a 3, 1 and 2 is fine. If it's a 3, you need special permission. If it's 4, you can't go. So, but you know what? That is state level data. So you might have the capital being, you know, more violent, but the outskirts or the rural areas are perfectly peaceful, and we would never know. Okay, when you look at any of the development statistics, whether this is infant mortality, or it is life expectancy or literacy rates, they're always only collected at the national level. That is a real huge problem. Then when you see most of the research that is coming out of developing countries is descriptive, maybe a little bit of qualitative, but that's it. Okay, you hardly ever see any quantitative research coming out of developing countries. The methods are not there. I cannot tell you what our data looks like. Okay? I cannot tell you how much time I spend cleaning that data before I can analyze it. Right? I cannot tell you, I mean, we had conversations, for instance, when we designed the survey. Do we use a 3-point scale or a 5-point scale? It's really difficult for people to, what's the difference between strongly agree and agree? Not an issue for us, right? Because we're over surveyed. We get a survey, 3 surveys every day. Right? They don't. So we went first with a 3-point scale. A 3-point scale is useless. Might as well, because you don't have any variability. I can't do anything with a 3-point scale. So we're now then we figured out, okay, what do we do with these hopes and fears, right? I'll give you a ladder with 10 rungs. That's not working. Okay, so what are we doing in our survey? We're asking, do you feel your community you're in a good place or in a bad place? Okay, and they say good place. Okay, then we say, okay, so we have 2 hands. This is my bad hand, this is my good hand. Where on my good hand would you be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Then we put this in. My code is this long to actually make a variable. So it's really very different. The quantitative data collection is very different from anything that we know, particularly than doing it on a large scale. I don't know to what extent we have representative samples anywhere. I haven't seen that. Right? This is the kind of stuff that we read every day. Not if you're in Africa, right? So, well, the data, that's the important thing, right? We have real data, participant data, and it's very, very messy. It's not really it's reliable. I don't know how valid it oftentimes is, right? You have issues because, yes, people speak English, some don't speak English very well, but think about this. The term community that we're basing our entire program on means totally different things, or doesn't even exist in some, right? So now we're talking about community. We have people responding to questions about community, but they don't understand what it means, or at least they don't see that it means what we're intending, right? So there's lots of problems, but I think having data is really important. Even if it's messy data, even if it's not as sophisticated and rigorous as it can be in the United States, but we have data, we can report something. Right? That's really, really important.
Next slide, please.
Next slide.
Next slide, yeah.
Why would you want the next slide? You don't like this one?
No, yeah. So I'm curious about the participants, how were they recruited? Because, and
was there an intention to recruit people who witnessed and even participated in the last Liberian Civil War? Because I'm assuming their responses to the questions people based on how they saw the conflict, or even if they participated in the conflict, right? And those this group, I'm assuming, witnessed the assassination of President Doe, right? Before Charles Taylor got into the scene. So maybe they have some form of hope after the Charles Taylor Civil War, and then the war resumed again in 2003, right? So their responses to, they might be a little bit pessimistic.
Yeah, but I don't see it here. Now, look, we have 36 right now, respondents that are over 60. Okay? That's not a lot. We need more data, right? And figure out if something happened. But I can't see any difference. If you look just at, if you look at that lower table, I don't see any real difference between the groups that we looked at. You all, it's very consistent. Your past is what it is. Your present is a little bit higher, and your future is higher still. So we see that everywhere. All of these, that's all fine. That's all great. This would be something, you know, if you need a dissertation and you want to tackle that question, talk to me. Right.
Just wanted to add a comment. I really appreciate the approach where before creating or implementing an intervention, you are asking the communities or listening to the communities, and that sounds very simple, but I think that is what we miss when we do things. That approach, when you are listening to the communities, because initially we see those superficial issues, right? Then through the community dialogue, we dive deeper into the root causes of the problem, and that's where the solutions need to come.
Then you come exactly there. Yes.
Once that happens, that also gives that community a sense of ownership. That is very important in peace building. I had a similar experience when I did a project with the military. I went to the chief of the army, and and I told him, hey, when I was an officer, we have the same academic issues with officers. 20 years later, it's the same thing. You know, and I have some solutions. I think I can help. And he goes, what are your solutions? And I don't have any right now. I do have some background information from my experience, but I don't have the solutions yet. You don't? No. I need to do a baseline needs assessment first to understand what are the current needs, right? And that approach, it could have cost me the project, but that approach actually helped the military take ownership of the project. Because we brought in experts from all the training centers, we had dialogues, and now they felt like it was their project, you know, instead of a consultant coming in and telling them what to do. So that's what I do. Appreciate that approach.
Thank you, Pranay. And you're absolutely right. What are your solutions? You already know. Better to turn around and walk out, right? Because you don't know what, you don't have any solutions. We shouldn't have solutions. Okay? Yes, you need to have solutions for your 6-year-old child, okay? But you don't need to have solutions. People can actually figure out how, you know, communities are actually very resilient. Okay? If you have communities, you look at Afghanistan right now after the earthquake. Okay? Do you think that a lot of these communities, you can't get to them? Okay? Yes, people suffer, but these communities rally around and figure out how to solve that issue. That has been existed for as long as we have communities. And now we're going in and saying, oh, we have a solution for you. No, that is one of the key problems. Unless we in the West would like to spend billions and billions of dollars every year for the unforeseeable future, paying for developing others who are not, but we're developing them, this is not their dream. Okay? This is like when you do your dissertation. Okay? You should do your dissertation, not your advisor's dissertation. Okay? And if you don't have your dissertation, well, I guess then that's a problem. Okay? So, Mike, we're out of time.
wrap up. If you have other questions, I'm sure he'll be around to be able to answer. Thank you so much, and if you join me in thanking Dr. Franke for.
Good morning, but I'll hang around, so if any other questions, let me know.
Yeah.
Okay, what else do we have?
I have a question for you too.
What are your guest speakers next week? Group mayor. What's the chief negotiator? South African,